Hello everyone, Xeno What If here. For those that are new to my YouTube channel, subscribe immediately to see more content, and also leave a comment down below to suggest more amazing kinds of videos. Bring in part 14 of What If Spider-Man MCU entered Damnchi. Link down in description of the fan fiction This What If. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Chapter 27. This is my familia. Bell made his way back toward the church with a light bounce in his step, the bags of groceries swinging gently at his sides. Hestia Familia had more members now. A growing familia. The thought alone was enough to make him smile. Leo, Gina, Primo. Leo had seemed smart and capable, her sharp eyes taking in everything as if she were already planning 3 steps ahead. Gina had practically glowed with enthusiasm, her excitement barely contained. Primo had looked a little nervous. Yes, but there had been determination in her posture, a quiet resolve that said she wouldn't back down easily. They weren't weak, they just needed guidance. At first, Bell hadn't really understood why Peter had been upset earlier. He'd been surprised by how sharp Peter's tone had gotten when he spoke to Lady Hestia. But thinking about it now, Peter wasn't wrong. Children shouldn't be diving into the dungeon. At least not alone. Bell adjusted the bags in his grip, expression firming. If they went, he would go with them. Simple. He didn't mind at all. Protecting people was part of being an adventurer. Part of being a hero. And Leo, Bell felt warmth creep up his ears. She was kind of pretty. He probably wouldn't even have realized she was a girl if Lady Hestia hadn't mentioned it, but now that he knew, it was impossible not to notice. Pretty, calm, smart. He shook his head quickly. Focus, Bell. Still, he would finally have more chances to protect girls in the dungeon. And right on cue, his grandfather's voice echoed triumphantly in his head. Bell, a true hero protects beautiful girls from danger. You leap into battle, defeat monsters in one strike, and they fall for you instantly. That's how legends are made. Bell stumbled slightly on the path. And remember, the more girls you save, the bigger your harem grows. Bell's face burned bright red. I'm not building a harem. He quickly looked around to make sure no one had heard him arguing with invisible elderly voices. His steps slowed slightly. Wait, Gina and Primo were too young. He absolutely did not want to win their hearts. That would be weird. Very weird. Bell frowned in thought. But Leo, should he try to win Leo's heart? Would that be cheating? On Ice, could it even count as cheating if Ice didn't have feelings for him? Or if she didn't even know he existed? Did she even remember him? Bell groaned softly and tilted his head toward the sky. Why was being a hero so complicated? Grandpa had definitely not explained this part. Bell reached the church gates still lost in thought. He pushed the heavy wooden doors open with his shoulder. And stopped. Whoa, the interior looked different. Most of the old pews were gone. In their place, 3 beds lined the left wall and 3 along the right, spaced evenly enough to leave a walkway down the center aisle. Clean sheets, folded blankets, modest, but orderly. The small table and chairs from the basement had been brought upstairs and set near one of the remaining pews, turning that corner into a modest little dining area. Soft crystal-powered lamps had been mounted along the walls, casting a steady pale glow across the church. There weren't nearly enough to fully banish the shadows. The ceiling arches and upper corners still rested in dimness, but the light was enough to make the space feel lived in. It really is a dormitory now. His mind immediately jumped to simple arithmetic. There was space for more beds. More beds meant more members. And more members meant a bigger familia. Peter, Hestia, and the girls were gathered near the makeshift dining area, deep in conversation. Peter had taken off his armor. It lay neatly arranged on one of the beds, faint lines of inactive circuitry glinting under the crystal lamps. Jane's voice chimed in from the armor. I would like to clarify, she said pleasantly, that the entanglement sequence used on Tiona was executed with 97.3% efficiency. A highly satisfactory performance. Gina's eyes sparkled. See, even Jane says it was amazing. Peter rubbed the back of his neck. Jane, you're not helping. I am always helping, the AI replied primly. Bell stepped in and placed the bags of food on the table. Peter looked up and smiled. For some reason, that smile made Bell slightly uncomfortable. Bell, Peter said brightly, you came just in time. Bell stiffened. What for? Peter gestured toward Gina. Gina here wanted to know exactly how I managed to defeat Tiona. So I thought you could volunteer for a demonstration. Bell blinked. Demonstration, he suddenly had a very bad feeling about this. Peter's smile widened. You remember how I captured Tiona? Belle gulped. I do. Great. So how about you jump as high as you can, and I'll capture you the same way. Belle took a step back. But I don't want to. Gina skipped up to him, eyes sparkling. Please, I want to see. Leo crossed her arms thoughtfully. I am curious as well. Primo leaned forward eagerly. I want to see Peter's magic. It must be really impressive if it captured a level 5. Hestia tilted her head. I'm curious too. All the gods keep asking about it. Belle stared at her in betrayal. Not you too, goddess. The girls, even Leo, started chanting. Please, please, please. Belle froze, and right on cue, his grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. Belle, a true hero never refuses a beautiful girl's request. Leap boldly, impress them, that's how legends are born. Belle closed his eyes. Fine. He stepped back into the center of the church. Here I go. He bent his knees, and launched himself nearly 20 feet into the air. He had to stretch his arm up and brush the ceiling just to make sure he didn't slam his head into it. I might have underestimated my own strength. Then gravity remembered him. He began to fall, and suddenly, whip, something caught his legs. Belle barely had time to blink before he was yanked upside down, hanging from the ceiling. Oof, more webs shot out, wrapping around his torso, arms, and legs in rapid succession until he was neatly bundled into a cocoon, only his head sticking out. Gina and Primo gasped in delighted unison. So cool, Gina beamed. That's amazing, Primo added, eyes shining. Leo smiled, impressed despite herself. Hestia nodded with obvious satisfaction. Belle squinted down at Peter. Please don't kiss me. There was a beat of silence. Jane responded first. For clarification, that maneuver was not included in the current demonstration protocol. Peter choked. Gina blinked. Why would he kiss you? Belle flushed. He kissed Tiona, while she was hanging upside down. Gina's eyes widened. That makes it even cooler. Jane added helpfully, historical data confirms this event. That's enough, Peter muttered. Belle made a strangled noise. Peter chuckled, then dispelled the webs. Belle dropped. And Peter caught him smoothly before setting him back on his feet. Belle wobbled slightly, hair a mess, dignity in critical condition. I liked it better when we were a small familia, he muttered. Hestia laughed. That's a lie. Belle froze. Goddess. Gina giggled. Primo hid a smile. Leo simply nodded like this was an established fact. Peter clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, let's eat before someone requests a second demonstration. That moved things along quickly. They gathered around the makeshift dining corner. The pasta and spaghetti were set out, thick gravies poured generously over the top. The muffins Belle had brought were arranged carefully in the center like a quiet triumph. The first few bites were cautious. Then, these are really good, Leo said. Primo nodded. The sauce is rich. Gina happily grabbed a second muffin. These are amazing. Belle smiled, a little shy but clearly pleased. Glad you like it. As they settled more comfortably into the meal, Peter glanced toward the armor resting on the bed. Jane, play my favorite playlist. A soft chime sounded. Then music began to fill the room. Layered melodies drifted through the church hall, and everyone paused mid-bite. The rhythms were unlike anything they had ever heard. They weren't like lutes, harps, or flutes, nothing any of them could identify. The sounds flowed continuously, overlapping so smoothly it was impossible to tell how many instruments were playing, or if they were instruments at all. Some tones rang sharp and bright, yet not metallic. Others hummed low and steady, deeper than any horn. A steady pulse ran beneath it all, too precise to be a drum struck by hand, too controlled to be made by anything visible. And then there were the voices. Not a bard, not a choir. The singing seemed to float in the air itself. Each note was perfect, layered over others that rose and fell behind it. The words didn't follow any pattern the listeners recognized. The rhythm of the lyrics wasn't like any song, ballad, or hymn they had ever heard. Gina tilted her head, eyes wide. What is that? Leo listened carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. I've never heard music like this before. Primo's hands clasped in her lap as she let the melody wash over her. It feels vast. Even Hestia and Belle, both of whom had heard Jane's music before, were completely absorbed, carried away by the richness and otherworldly beauty of the sound. Peter just leaned back, calm, as if this were completely normal. Songs from my homeland, he said simply. The others exchanged glances. No one quite had the words for what they had just heard. It didn't sound like something performed for applause. It didn't even feel entirely human. It felt, elsewhere, warm, distant, like a memory that didn't belong to them. Leo tilted her head. Where is your homeland? Peter didn't hesitate. He'd practiced this answer by now, per Hestia's firm instructions. I'm from an island called Long Island, he replied smoothly. It's very far from here. And you? He added quickly, redirecting before more questions could follow. Leo brightened. My father's a traveling merchant from Rakia, so I've been all over. Ports, border towns, trade cities. Gina nodded. Nike Familia travels too. Primo gave a small shrug. Since we were children, I don't really remember staying in one place. The conversation drifted into stories of roads, ships, markets, and distant cities. The music continued softly in the background, weaving between laughter, clinking forks, and warm chatter. The once abandoned church no longer felt temporary. It felt alive, full, growing. By the time the last crumbs were gone and the table cleared, the strange, beautiful music still lingered in the air, like the echo of a place none of them had ever seen, but somehow missed. Leo was the first to break the comfortable silence. So, can we go into the dungeon tomorrow? Gina and Primo immediately straightened, eyes shining with barely contained excitement. Peter didn't answer at once. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as if reviewing a checklist in his head. Well, he began evenly, first you'll need to register with the guild. That means paperwork, and getting assigned a guild advisor. The girls deflated a fraction. Then, he continued, you'll need proper equipment. Potions, real armor, real weapons, not just enthusiasm. That drew a small, sheepish laugh. And after that, Gina pressed, leaning forward. After that, Peter said calmly, you can enter the dungeon. All three perked up again. But, he added, glancing toward Belle, your first dive won't be alone. Belle and I will accompany you. We'll enter as a familia. Gina and Primo immediately high-fived. Leo tried to look composed, but failed. Belle felt a small swell of pride in his chest. Their first dive together, as a real familia. Hestia stood and brushed her hands together, cutting through the rising excitement. Peter, Belle, basement. Belle straightened instantly. Fauna update, she said. After the ritual, she handed Belle and Peter their new sheets. Belle Crenel, LV, 1, Strength, E428, D521. Endurance, E412, E492. Dexterity, E430, D530. Agility, D585, B725. Mind, I0, I0. Magic, opening square bracket closing square bracket. Skills, opening square bracket closing square bracket. Peter Parker, LV, 1, Strength, I33, I38. Endurance, I4, I6. Dexterity, I36, I45. Agility, I59, I70. Mind, H102, H117. Magic, Arachnostrand. No chant magic. Shoots webs from hands. Skills, Spider powers. Abilities akin to a spider's natural capabilities. Spider sense. Can sense danger. Belle's eyes widened. Agility had leapt to B, and both strength and dexterity were now D. He had fought hard today, taken down multiple orcs, but this growth felt unreal even for him. His chest tightened, half excitement, half disbelief. Peter let Belle have his sheet after briefly glancing at it. As usual, Peter's growth was far less even though he was the one doing most of the heavy lifting. While Belle studied both sheets, Peter had already moved on. Hestia, I need your signature here. She blinked. What is it? Application to open a Familia bank account. She tilted her head, clearly puzzled. Bank account. She squinted at the form as if it were written in ancient runes. What's that supposed to be? Peter patiently explained deposits, withdrawals, and why storing dungeon earnings properly was important. Hestia listened with exaggerated seriousness, nodding as if he were revealing divine secrets. She signed with a flourish far more dramatic than necessary. There, the mighty Hestia Familia is officially entering high society. Belle looked up from the sheets. That's not what that means. Peter was already heading toward the stairs. I'm going to sleep. Belle folded the papers carefully and followed. They had barely reached the steps when Hestia suddenly gasped. Belle can sleep with me. Belle froze. Please don't go, she added dramatically. But, goddess, Belle stammered, flustered instantly, we have plenty of beds now. You can sleep comfortably here. He shot Peter a desperate look. Peter glanced back once, shrugged casually, you're on your own, and continued upstairs. Traitor. Hestia crossed her arms, pouting in full force. I don't want to be alone. Goddess, what will the girls think? Belle whispered urgently. Then I'll sleep in the church too. Hestia shot back immediately. There are enough beds now. I'll sleep with my children. I refuse to stay in this underground room alone. She said it with such finality it sounded like a divine decree. Belle stared at her for a moment, then sighed in defeat. At least now he would have his own bed. Hestia followed him upstairs without hesitation. The three girls had already claimed 3 beds along one side of the room, chatting quietly among themselves. Peter had taken one of the side beds near the wall, already half settled and entirely uninterested in the ongoing drama. Belle chose the center bed on their side of the room. Hestia promptly claimed the one beside him. The girls looked mildly confused when they noticed the goddess joining them instead of sleeping in her own room, but, politely, they didn't comment. Belle sat down on his mattress and let out a quiet breath. Frankly, he had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with how tightly Hestia clung to him in her sleep, arms wrapped around him, holding him like a personal body pillow. It wasn't appropriate. She was a goddess. A very affectionate, very dramatic, very stubborn goddess. Belle lay down, staring up at the ceiling, and could only hope this new arrangement would finally allow him to sleep without waking up smothered. Because now he dreaded that familiar sensation, waking with warmth pressed against his face, only to slowly, horrifyingly realize exactly what it was. The goddess's bosom. There was always that brief, blissfully ignorant half-second where his brain hadn't caught up yet. Warm, soft, comfortable. And then, recognition. Followed immediately by panic. The first few times, he had panicked, flailed, and nearly fallen out of bed. Now he simply lay there in stunned silence for a few seconds before attempting a careful, respectful extraction. It was not dignified. It was not proper. This was not the kind of trial heroes were supposed to endure. Belle pulled the blanket higher over his head. Surely, tonight he would wake up with nothing but a pillow in his personal space. One could hope. Chapter 28, Measured Steps. Next morning, Peter woke early and well rested. Sleeping on an actual bed was infinitely better than the sagging couch he had been tolerating. He stretched his arms above his head and exhaled. The church was a little chilly. A faint draft drifted through the hall, probably from the broken windows higher up near the rafters. He frowned. I'll have to fix those. Then he looked toward Belle's bed. And immediately froze. Hestia was no longer in her own. Sometime during the night, she had crossed over to Belle's bed and was now fully draped over him. One arm wrapped around his neck, one leg thrown across his waist. Belle's face was buried in divine cushioning. Peter closed his eyes briefly. Of course, he glanced toward the opposite side of the hall. The girls were still asleep, breathing softly, blissfully unaware of the scandal unfolding just a few beds away. With the calm efficiency, Peter rose, walked over, and carefully peeled the goddess off Belle. In one smooth motion, he clamped a hand over her mouth before she could protest. MMMPH. Shish. Belle stirred at the sudden loss of pressure and blinked awake. Peter, now holding a squirming goddess, carried her back to her bed and plopped her down like a sack of potatoes, his hand still firmly clamped over her mouth to prevent any outbursts. Belle shot upright, red-eyed and wild-haired. When did you get on my bed, goddess? He whispered urgently. Peter still had a hand over Hestia's mouth. He leaned down slightly, voice low and unimpressed. Have some decency, goddess. We have more members now. What will the girls think? He removed his hand. Hestia blinked up at them, then quickly checked that the girls were still asleep. I don't remember, she whispered defensively. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Peter stared at her. If you do this again, I'll lock you in the basement at night. Hestia gasped softly. You wouldn't. Try me, she muttered under her breath. My own children don't respect me. Peter's gaze sharpened. What was that? Nothing, she said quickly, looking away. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. Aren't you a virgin goddess? At least act with some dignity. Hestia sputtered in outrage, face turning red, though whether from embarrassment or indignation was unclear. Beside them, Belle sat frozen, still processing everything that had just happened. He slowly touched his face. Warm, very warm. He looked at Peter with quiet gratitude. Peter gave him a small nod that clearly said, "You're welcome." Satisfied that the crisis had been successfully contained, Peter exhaled and headed downstairs toward the bathroom, deciding he had done enough divine damage control for one morning. Belle cautiously lowered himself back onto his pillow. Hestia crossed her arms in her bed and turned away dramatically. "Cruel," she whispered. "What's wrong with a goddess snuggling her cute little child?" Belle's face turned bright red again. He shrank slightly into his blanket and whispered back, flustered, "Gee goddess, please respect my personal space." Hestia promptly ignored him and rolled over, already fast asleep again as if the entire exchange had never happened. During breakfast, while the girls were still half focused on their food, Peter spoke up casually. "Tomorrow's Monsterphilia, I'll be going with Tiona." Gina perked up instantly. Peter continued, unfazed, "Why don't you buy tickets for everyone else, Hestia? You can all go together." The girls exchanged excited looks, energy rising immediately. "Really?" Primo asked. "That would be amazing," Gina added. Hestia puffed up slightly at being entrusted with something official. "Of course, leave it to me." Belle swallowed a bite of bread and nodded. "Yeah, I'm curious about it too. I've heard it's incredible." Peter took another bite before looking at Hestia again. "And goddess, after that, please look for a house to rent." Hestia nodded automatically. "Of course, but don't finalize anything," Peter added calmly. "Don't bargain, don't put down a deposit. We'll see it and decide together. As a familia." She muttered into her plate, "My own children don't trust me." Peter ignored the comment. The girls smirked. "And by chance," he continued evenly, "if you decide to recruit someone while you're out, please wait until I return." Hestia's eyes widened slightly. "From now on," Peter said, "we'll have proper interviews before anyone joins the familia." Belle coughed into his hand, trying not to laugh. Gina grinned. "That sounds serious." "It is," Peter replied. Hestia huffed, crossing her arms. "I recruited all of you just fine." Peter gave her a look. She avoided eye contact. Belle scratched his cheek awkwardly. "I mean, it did work out." "That's not the point," Peter said. Hestia puffed her cheeks. "You're all ganging up on your goddess." "No," Peter corrected calmly. "As captain of the familia, it falls to me to implement at least some semblance of structure." He took another bite of his breakfast as if he hadn't just declared administrative authority over a deity. Hestia stared at him in disbelief. "I am the goddess." "And you're doing great," Peter replied smoothly. "Spiritually." Belle nearly choked on his drink. The girls openly grinned. Hestia slumped back in her chair, betrayed by her own familia. Unbelievable. Sometime later, the Hestia familia entered the guild. The girls were practically bouncing with every step, barely containing their excitement. Belle walked beside them, trying to look composed. Peter led the way. The guild was still short-staffed, but at this early hour it was relatively quiet. Only a few adventurers lingered near the boards, and the usual noise had yet to build. They approached a counter staffed by a pink-haired human girl. Peter stepped forward. "We'd like to register new adventurers under our familia." The girl nodded professionally and handed over several forms. "Please fill these out." The girls gathered around a nearby table, carefully writing their information. Gina kept glancing up at the bustling hall like she might miss something important. Primo was meticulous. Leo looked oddly calm, focused. The forms were returned quickly. Peter checked them before sliding them across the counter. "We'll also require an advisor for them," he added. "If possible, Miss Aina." The pink-haired girl frowned slightly. "Miss Toole is currently assigned to Monsterphilia preparations. She's been on extended duty shifts all week." She gave a small apologetic smile. "To be honest, her schedule is already overwhelming. I doubt she'd be able to properly take on additional rookies right now." Peter considered that. Belle leaned toward the girls and whispered under his breath, "You're saved." Gina and Primo looked confused. Leo narrowed her eyes slightly. "If you'd like," she continued, straightening a little, "I can become their advisor. I have plenty of experience." Peter looked at her with mild scrutiny. Before he could respond, Leo stepped forward politely. "We'd be glad to have you as our advisor." The girl brightened. "Thank you, my name is Misha Flott." She offered a small, professional bow. Then she added, with a slight wince, "Unfortunately, I won't be able to conduct a proper orientation today. We're short-staffed because of Monsterphilia." She turned to Peter. You're the captain, correct? Yes. Good, she said with an easy smile. Then you can guide them today. She shuffled a few papers on her desk, glancing at a stack that looked only half organized. Schedule a proper advisory session after Monsterphilia. Once things calm down a bit. She paused, thinking. We'll go over dungeon maps, survival basics, monster behavior, and, what to do, and definitely what not to do, in the dungeon. She gave an encouraging nod, as if that covered everything important. Peter regarded her for a moment, measuring her, then simply nodded. We'll purchase starter packs for all 3 of them. Gina tilted her head. What's that? Misha perked up immediately. This part she could do smoothly. It's a beginner bundle, she explained, pulling a pamphlet from somewhere in the stack. Magically expanded backpack, basic knife, light chest plate, and 2 low-grade healing potions. All for the very reasonable price of 5,000 Valis. She smiled brightly at the word reasonable. Gina and Primo exchanged looks. I don't really like armor, Gina admitted. Primo nodded seriously. Me neither. Metal interferes with magic. Misha blinked. It's just a light chest plate. Primo shook her head firmly. No metal. Misha hesitated, then shrugged. We can substitute with extra healing potions instead. Peter shook his head slightly. Give mind potions for Primo instead of the extra healing potions. Misha adjusted the order slip. Right, mind potions. That works. Primo's eyes lit up, then she looked at the knife in the starter pack. Is that steel? Yes, Misha replied. Primo frowned faintly. I'd prefer not to use metal. Misha blinked again. Today was full of preferences. She rummaged beneath the counter for a moment before pulling out a darker, curved blade. I do have a knife made from Warshadow Claw, Misha said, placing it on the counter. The blade had a faint natural sheen, darker and more organic than forged. But it'll cost an extra 300 Valis. Primo picked it up carefully, almost reverently, running her fingers lightly along the flat of the blade as if feeling for something unseen. Her expression brightened. She glanced at Peter, hopeful. I'd like this one. Peter studied her face more than the weapon, then gave a small nod. Add it. Payment was handled without further fuss. Within minutes, the girls were holding their adjusted gear, expanded backpacks, customized weapons, potions suited to their needs, examining everything with fascination as if they'd just been armed for a grand expedition rather than a beginner's dive. As the Hestia Familia headed toward the exit, Misha leaned lightly against the counter and allowed herself a small, satisfied smirk. She had successfully protected her friend Aina from taking on even more rookies. Honestly, Aina would have worked herself sick worrying over 3 young girls diving into the dungeon. She had a tendency to get far too attached to the adventurers she was meant to advise. And on top of that, Misha had secured advisor duty for herself, something the senior staff were oddly hesitant to entrust her with. She didn't understand why. She was perfectly competent when it came to guiding adventurers. One of her assigned adventurers had even survived long enough to reach level 2. That had to count for something, right? Sometime later, they reached the 8th floor of Babel Tower. Unlike the grand weapon halls below, this level was packed with smaller shops crammed side by side. Blacksmiths called out deals, customers argued over prices, and the constant clang of steel echoed through the crowded corridor. Weapons hung from walls, were stacked in barrels, or laid across crowded tables, far less polished, but far more affordable. Gina moved first. She browsed through one stall, lifting blades, testing grips awkwardly before finally settling on a pair of twin single-hand swords. They were simple, practical, and light enough for her to move comfortably. These feel right, she said, giving them a careful swing. Peter nodded. It suits you. Leo had wandered farther down the row. When Peter finally spotted what she was examining, he stopped. The great sword in her hands was massive, and double-edged. A long, broad blade sharpened on both sides. It looked comically oversized next to her frame. Peter stared. Are you sure you want that? Leo rested the tip against the stone floor and looked at him evenly. Dead sure. Belle leaned toward Gina. Can she even lift that? Leo raised it cleanly, both hands steady, the heavy blade catching the light as it moved. Peter exhaled through his nose and shook his head. All right. After much counting, recounting, and raised voices from nearby stalls, the shopkeeper announced, that'll be 40,000 Valis. Leo stepped forward immediately. We're buying 3 swords, Leo said calmly. Give us a discount. The shopkeeper snorted. 3, that pair counts as 1 set. And the greatsword is premium weight. You're purchasing 2 items. Gina blinked. But they're 2 swords. A matched pair, the shopkeeper shot back. Balanced and forged together. Sold together. Leo didn't waver. We're still walking away with 3 blades. And I'm still charging for 2 items, he countered, folding his arms. Leo shifted slightly, pointing at the greatsword. The tempering line near the midsection is uneven. The shopkeeper bristled. It's structurally sound. I didn't say it wasn't, Leo replied evenly. But it's there. He opened his mouth to argue again, then hesitated. And, Leo added, we're new adventurers. If we come back for upgrades, we'll remember who treated us fairly. That made him pause properly. Several long seconds passed. 38,000, he tried. 35, Leo replied immediately. He groaned. After a few more rounds of stubborn back and forth, the total finally dropped to 35,000 Valis. Leo stepped back, satisfied. Peter looked at her with faint, genuine approval before making the payment. As the weapons were wrapped, Peter asked, where can we purchase a proper magic staff for a level 1? The merchant jerked his thumb toward the stairwell. 9th floor. The entire floor's leased by the Hecate Familia. They specialize in mage equipment. Primo's eyes lit up instantly. Without hesitation, the Hestia Familia headed for the stairs. As they climbed the stairs, Belle glanced at Leo. Hey, Leo, how come you didn't bargain for the guild starter pack? You bargained for everything else. Leo didn't slow her pace. Because that backpack is magically expanded. Even a minor spatial expansion enchantment like that would cost more than 5,000 Valis on its own. Belle blinked. Add the knife and 2 low-grade healing potions, she continued calmly, and the total value should be at least 10,000. The guild is clearly selling it at a subsidized rate to support rookie adventurers. She adjusted the strap of her newly purchased greatsword. It would have been foolish to haggle over something already being sold below cost. Belle stared at her, openly impressed. Peter was, too, though he only showed it with a small, approving glance. The 9th floor was a sharp contrast to the chaos of the 8th. It was quiet, spacious, refined. Only a handful of customers moved between the shops, most of them elves. The storefronts themselves were immaculate. Some displayed their wares like museum exhibits, staves mounted on velvet stands under soft magical lighting. The price tags beneath them were staggering. 100 million Valis, and higher. Other stores were more modest, catering to low-level adventurers. Even there, the cheapest staves began at 50,000 Valis. Peter noticed something else, wooden swords displayed in a few windows. For a moment, he frowned. Then he remembered Primo's aversion to metal. Enchanted wood, most likely. Reinforced for sharpness and durability. They approached one of the more affordable shops. Primo immediately drifted toward the staff rack, studying each one with quiet intensity. Peter folded his arms, thinking. In most games, mage-type characters were glass cannons, devastating at range, fragile up close. He got an idea. He approached the shopkeeper, a female elf of striking beauty, elegant enough to outshine most supermodels back on Earth. Excuse me, Peter said politely. Could we get a staff with a detachable spearhead at the end? Essentially a staff spear. The elf froze. Then her expression darkened. Blasphemy, she shouted. Peter blinked. No elf would degrade a staff in such a barbaric manner. She was visibly fuming now, as though he had just suggested setting her shop on fire for warmth. He held up his hands slightly. Understood. Deciding that continuing this conversation would only worsen things, he wisely guided the familia back out of the shop. A human girl a few stalls down, who had very clearly heard the elf's outburst, caught Peter's eye and waved them over with an amused smile. She looked about 16 or 17, with dark hair pulled loosely behind her back and bright, lively eyes that missed nothing. There was a natural prettiness to her, effortless rather than polished, and a confidence in the way she leaned over her stall. Over here, she called lightly. Peter approached her stall, the others following. What was that about? She asked, barely containing her grin. I asked if they could make a staff with a detachable spearhead, Peter replied evenly. A staff-spear combination. The woman blinked, then laughed outright. Oh, that explains it. She leaned forward on her counter. Elves are particular about their staves. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. They treat them like sacred heirlooms. Suggest modifying one and they act like you proposed chopping up one of their sacred trees for firewood. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. And honestly, Most of them act like they already have a staff lodged up their ass. No wonder they wouldn't want a spearhead added to it. Belle choked. Gina burst out laughing. Primo looked scandalized. Gina's laughter drew the shopkeeper's attention to the group properly for the first time. Her eyes shifted, and then widened slightly when she noticed Primo's ears. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't realize we had an elfling here." Primo blinked, then waved it off with a small, easy laugh. "It's okay. My father says something similar." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "He just uses nicer words." The girl looked surprised. "He left the forest," Primo continued simply. "So I've never even been to an elven forest. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be offended about." Her tone was matter of fact, honest, almost innocent. The girl stared at her for a moment, then smiled. "Huh, an elf without a superiority complex. That's rare." She leaned on her counter. "Don't change, kiddo." Peter had already decided he liked this shop. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl grinned and gave a small, theatrical bow from behind her counter. "Rhea Marlowe, Level 1 Adventurer of the Hecate Familia, at your service." There was a playful flourish at the end, but her posture was steady, used to handling customers. Peter smiled faintly. "So, Rhea Marlowe, can you provide us with a staff spear combination?" Rhea winced apologetically. "Unfortunately, no. If I started selling those, the tree huggers in my familia would probably throw me out of the tower." Belle coughed. Rhea leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "However, I can sell you a staff that's ideal for that kind of modification. Reinforced core, balanced length, good mana conduction." She tapped one of the simpler staves behind her. "You'd just need to have a spearhead fitted by a blacksmith afterward." She flashed a confident smile. "I can even recommend one who won't faint at the idea." She tapped a few staves behind her. Then she looked at Primo. "What kind of magic do you use, kiddo?" Primo straightened a little. "Light elemental magic." Rhea let out a low whistle. "That's rare." She turned, scanning the rack behind her before carefully pulling out a staff and bringing it forward. "This should be perfect for you." Peter stepped closer to examine it. The staff was slightly taller than Primo herself. The wood was almost golden in color, not painted, but naturally luminous, as though sunlight had seeped into its grain and decided to stay. The shaft was smooth but not overly polished, retaining a subtle texture that hinted at its living origin. Near the top of the staff, a red crystal, cut in the shape of a diamond symbol from playing cards, was embedded directly into the wood rather than mounted on top. The wood extended upward past the gem, splitting into two straight projections that rose and crossed protectively over it. From the front, the design formed a clean X-like silhouette. From the side, it was clear the structure was protective rather than decorative. "The projections shield the focus crystal," Rhea explained. "So you can rest that end on the ground without damaging it. If you add a spearhead at the other end, that becomes your top." She flipped the staff smoothly to demonstrate. "This staff is reinforced for bashing monsters up to the 13th floor without cracking." She tapped the shaft with her knuckle. "Goldenheart ash, dense, flexible, and very compatible with light magic. It enhances clarity and control rather than raw destructive output." Then she pointed at the gem. "It's a radiant cut sunflare core," she explained. "Stable, responsive, and extremely compatible with light-based magic. The crystal amplifies brightness and focus instead of just dumping out more power." Primo reached out and held it carefully, almost reverently. For a brief moment, the red gem shimmered faintly, like a spark catching sunlight. Rhea smiled. "See, it already likes you." Peter looked up from the staff. "How much?" 80,000 Valis. Primo's face fell instantly. Leo stepped forward without missing a beat. "That's steep for a level 1 focus." Rhea raised a finger before the negotiation could properly begin. "Prices on this floor are fixed." Leo opened her mouth again. "However," Rhea continued, glancing down at Primo, "since I like this kid." She gently patted Primo on the head. Ray's smile turned genuine when Primo didn't flinch or pull away. "I'll let it go for 75,000. No less. Take it or leave it." Primo looked up at Peter hopefully, clutching the staff a little tighter. Peter met her gaze for a moment, then turned back to Rhea. "Do you accept banknotes?" Ray's eyes flicked to him, assessing, and then she smiled. "Of course I do." Peter calmly wrote out a banknote and handed it over. Rhea examined it briefly before nodding in approval. Peter asked, "You mentioned a blacksmith. Who were you recommending?" "She's with the Goibniu Familia," Rhea replied. Name's Kellen Forgeheart. She adjusted a few items on her stall before continuing. She's kind of an outcast. Half elf, half dwarf. The entire Hestia familia visibly reacted. Belle straightened. Gina blinked. Leo's eyes widened slightly. Even Primo looked surprised. Peter alone looked confused. Rhea noticed and shrugged. I have a contract with her. The elves in my familia hate that. She rolled her eyes dismissively. I don't give a damn what they think. Her expression sharpened slightly, losing the playful tone. She does excellent work, especially with hybrid designs and magic focuses. If you're adding a spearhead to a staff, she's the one you want. Peter nodded slowly. Then we'll pay her a visit. The Hestia familia was currently on the first floor of the dungeon. Leo stepped forward and, with a single clean swing of her greatsword, beheaded the goblin. The blade cut so smoothly the monster's body remained standing for half a second before collapsing. Belle knelt beside the corpse. Watch carefully, he said gently, drawing his knife. He sliced into the goblin's chest and located the magic stone embedded within. You have to remove the crystal cleanly. If you damage it, the value drops. The moment he extracted the stone, the goblin's body dissolved into ash, scattering across the stone floor. Peter's gaze drifted toward the stairway leading deeper. He was tempted. On the first floor, the spawn rate was low, the corridors quiet, almost deceptively so. But he forced himself to stay where he was. He wouldn't drag the girls into unnecessary danger. He wouldn't expose them to his brand of recklessness. After some time, a faint growl echoed through the corridor. A kobold stepped into view. Gina's eyes lit up instantly. That one's mine, she shouted, already sprinting forward. Gina, be careful, Peter called after her. The kobold slashed with its claws, but Gina dipped beneath the strike as if she had read the movement in advance. Her twin swords flashed in tight, controlled arcs, not wild swings, but deliberate cuts. Steel bit into shoulder, thigh, then flank in smooth succession. She moved like she was dancing, light on her feet, balanced, precise. Every dodge was economical, every strike purposeful. The kobold snarled in frustration and lunged in a desperate, overextended charge. Gina pivoted behind it in one fluid motion and crossed her blades in a clean, decisive strike. The monster staggered, then it collapsed heavily onto the stone floor, dark blood pooling beneath it. She exhaled softly, barely winded. Peter stared at her, genuinely impressed. Did you have prior training? Gina straightened proudly, lifting her chin. My mom showed me a few moves. Belle walked over as Gina knelt down. Angle your knife like this, he instructed, guiding her hands as she carefully extracted the magic stone. The kobold dissolved into ash the moment the crystal came free. Primo crossed her arms, chin lifted. The next monster is mine. Gina smirked. Oh, and who's going to hold it still while you chant, huh? Peter stepped forward casually, rolling his shoulders. Don't worry about it, he said. Leave it to me. A little while later, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the corridor. A section of the dungeon wall fractured. Stone split apart with a dry snap as a goblin clawed its way out, red eyes gleaming. Peter reacted instantly. A flick of his wrist, a thin strand shot forward and snapped tight around the goblin's legs, pinning them to the floor before it could even fully stand. The creature screeched and clawed uselessly at the ground. Peter glanced at Primo. It's all yours. Primo stepped forward, lifting her staff. The red gem at its tip began to glow, pulsing brighter with each word of her chant. Dazzling stars crossing the jet-black sky. Listen to my immature prayer, guide the flash. Come, shine of tears, defeat the filthy. Lumine Pleiades. It began as a shimmer in the air before her, faint points of light gathering in a small constellation. Then they sharpened. Radiant beams shot forward in clean, piercing streaks. They tore through the goblin's body, slicing and cauterizing at the same time. Flesh split apart in smoking lines of light. The creature shrieked. One beam struck directly into its chest. There was a sharp crack. The magic stone shattered. The goblin disintegrated instantly into fine dust. Primo thrust her staff into the air triumphantly. Yes. Belle blinked, eyes wide. Wow, Peter couldn't help but grin. For a split second, he was reminded of Iron Man's repulsor blasts, concentrated, brilliant, devastating. Leo, however, crossed her arms. Remember not to destroy the magic stones, she said firmly. We don't earn anything if the crystal is destroyed. That kill gave us nothing. Primo froze mid-celebration. It looked cool though, she muttered. They continued exploring the first floor, keeping to the wider corridors where the walls showed fresh cracks, signs of imminent spawns. Goblins and kobolds emerged at irregular intervals, and the three girls rotated naturally, taking turns handling each encounter. Belle and Peter didn't interfere. They observed. Belle offered guidance when needed, reminders about positioning, timing, and how to extract the magic stones cleanly. Peter watched more quietly, eyes constantly scanning, stepping in only when something threatened to spiral out of control. Leo's swings weren't polished. They were heavy, forceful, and just a little stiff. She relied more on strength than refinement, bringing the greatsword down in decisive, two-handed arcs that ended fights quickly but lacked true finesse. Peter could see the strain building. Between encounters, she subtly rolled her shoulder. She adjusted her grip more often than necessary. Each time she rested, the flat of the blade lingered against her shoulder a little longer. The weapon was heavy, too heavy for extended use at her current level, especially on her first day in the dungeon. Gina, meanwhile, still looked fresh. Her breathing was steady, her movements lively. Peter remembered that Amazons were naturally stronger than humans. Combined with her prior training, it explained why she was barely winded even after multiple engagements. Another kobold split through the wall with a snarl. Peter flicked his wrist and webbed its legs to the floor before it could fully steady itself. "Primo," he called, "before you cast, try something." She looked at him curiously. "Control your output. Release one beam at a time. Focus on specific targets instead of firing everything at once." Behind them, the restrained kobold snarled, then started barking exactly like a dog, the sharp sound echoing down the corridor. Primo lifted her staff. The gem glowed as she began her chant. Dazzling stars crossing the jet-black sky. Listen to my immature prayer, guide the flash. Come, shine of tears, defeat the filthy. Lumine Pleiades. The constellation shimmered into existence. She focused. One beam fired. It sliced cleanly through the kobold's arm. A second beam followed, precise and sharp, beheading the monster instantly. The third beam pierced its falling body. But then, footsteps. Another kobold rounded the corner, charging toward them with a feral snarl. Primo's eyes widened, her concentration faltered. 4 beams erupted at once toward the new target. They tore into it simultaneously, shredding flesh and bone. The kobold didn't even get a second scream before it collapsed into mangled remains. Silence fell. Primo lowered her staff slowly and looked at Peter. "Sorry, I couldn't keep shooting one at a time when I tried to focus on the new enemy." Peter gave her an easy smile. "Don't worry about it, you did good." As he stepped closer, he noticed she was swaying slightly. "Do you need a mind potion?" She shook her head stubbornly. "I'm fine." Peter glanced sideways. Leo was sweating now, the flat of her greatsword resting across her shoulder as she steadied her breathing. Even she didn't try to hide it. Peter made the decision. "That's enough for today." Gina blinked. "But I can keep going." "You can continue later," Peter replied calmly. "You're a team. When your teammates are tired, that's the signal to stop." Gina opened her mouth to argue, then glanced at Leo and Primo. She sighed. "Fine." Privately, Peter was relieved Leo had chosen the greatsword. For now, she didn't have the endurance to swing it endlessly. The Falna would strengthen her in time, that much was certain. But until then, their dungeon runs would stay limited. Belle gave a small approving smile. Slow progress was still progress. And this is the end of part 14 of this amazing crossover, What If? Do not forget to leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel.